The engine exploded, fuel leaking, 30,000 feet altitude. But Sarah Mitchell didn't panic at all, because this was her 47th test flight. The problem was, nobody knew this aircraft existed, and now the entire air traffic control was about to discover who she really was. What city are you watching from today? If you believe silent hero stories deserve to be told, don't forget to subscribe. Edwards Air Force Base, in the middle of the California desert, was a place where secrets were hidden in the sky. Sarah Mitchell, 32 years old, 5 feet 6 inches tall, chestnut hair pulled back in a tight bun, green eyes. But her most striking feature was that she hadn't spoken unnecessarily to anyone for 6 years. Morning 0600 hours. When Sarah entered the hangar, other pilots were drinking coffee and discussing daily training plans. Major Mike Rodriguez, the old-school commander of the F-16 Squadron, frowned when he saw Sarah. "Mitchell," he said, clear displeasure in his voice. "Today you'll be going on a standard training flight. Basic maneuvers, formation flying. You need practice coordinating with other pilots." Sarah nodded. "Understood, sir." Pilot Marcus Thompson, young and overconfident, whispered his friend. Ghost Woman spoke again. This time she said a whole 3 words. "That's a record." The other pilots chuckled. Sarah acted as if she heard nothing and walked toward her own hangar. But the hangar Sarah went to was different from the others. This hangar's entrance required an extra security card and had an authorized personnel only sign posted. Sarah swiped her card and entered. The aircraft in the hangar was apparently a normal F-16 Fighting Falcon. But looking closely, some differences were noticeable. The sensors at the wing tips were slightly larger. The displays in the cockpit contained technologies not found in standard F-16s. And most importantly, the aircraft's tail number, AFX-47, a code that existed in no official records. As Sarah conducted her pre-flight check around her aircraft, Chief Master Sergeant Williams approached. Williams was a technician with 25 years of experience and one of the few people who knew the secrets of the program Sarah worked on. "Morning, Mitchell," Williams said in a low voice. "Today we have an engine stress test. We need to see how the new turbine blades are holding up." Sarah nodded. "Are the test parameters ready?" "Data recorders are active, but be careful, this new engine is very powerful. It produces 40% more thrust than a standard F-16. Sarah climbed into the cockpit and began checking systems. Screens not found in normal F-16s showed her the aircraft's true performance values. This aircraft was part of the Advanced Fighter Technology Integration Program, a completely classified project that hadn't even been presented to Congress yet. A voice came from the tower. "AF X-47, are you ready for taxi?" Sarah opened her microphone. "Tower X-47 ready for taxi. X-47, taxi to runway 04. Cleared for training flight." As Sarah taxied her aircraft to the runway, she saw that the other pilots' aircraft were normal F-16s. They were indeed going on a routine training flight. But Sarah's mission was different. "Tower X-47 ready for takeoff. X-47, cleared for takeoff." Sarah increased thrust, and the aircraft rapidly accelerated. In normal F-16s, takeoff distance was approximately 550 meters, but X-47 took off in just 300 meters. Extra power, extra performance, extra classified. In the air, Sarah began the test protocol. Altitude 15,000 feet, speed Mach 0.8. Engine parameters appeared normal, but 20 minutes later, a sudden vibration started in the left engine. Warning lights began flashing. Engine malfunction, left engine. Sarah looked at the instrument panel. Oil pressure was dropping, EGT, exhaust gas temperature, was approaching critical level. This wasn't a normal engine failure. This was the experimental engine overloading. A voice came from the tower. "X-47, we see your position on radar. Give status report." Sarah hesitated. This aircraft existence was classified, but now she had an emergency situation. "Tower, I'm experiencing a minor engine issue. Investigating." In reality, the situation was far from minor. Engine temperature exceeded critical level, and Sarah had to shut down the left engine. Flying an F-16 on single engine was possible, but this hadn't been tested for this experimental aircraft. Tower, X-47, immediate return to base. Emergency landing procedure. That's when Sarah's real problem began. This aircraft couldn't land using normal emergency procedures. Because its landing gear operated with an experimental hydraulic system and with single engine, this system couldn't get enough power. Tower, Sarah said, tension in her voice for the first time. Emergency landing is not possible. Air traffic controller Dave Harrison in the tower was surprised. What do you mean not possible? F-16s can land on single engine. Tower, this is not a standard F-16. This sentence set off alarm bells in the tower. Harrison immediately called his supervisor. Colonel Janet Stevens took over at the tower. X-47, identify yourself. Who are you and what are you flying? Sarah took a deep breath. According to classification rules, she shouldn't give this information. But at 30,000 feet with single engine, with an aircraft that couldn't land, the situation had changed. Tower, I am test pilot Sarah Mitchell. My aircraft is classified experimental aircraft. There was silence in the tower. Then Colonel Stevens spoke again. Mitchell, what program are you in? AFDI program, ma'am. Advanced Fighter Technology Integration. Colonel Stevens' expression changed. She had heard of the AFDI program, but didn't know the details. This program was so classified that only a handful of people at the Pentagon knew all the details. Mitchell, what is your current status? Left engine shut down. Hydraulic pressure insufficient for landing gear deployment. Standard emergency procedures not applicable. Meanwhile, other pilots were listening to the radio frequency. Marcus Thompson whispered to his friend, "What is this woman doing? What experimental aircraft?" Major Rodriguez looked more serious. He knew Sarah's hangar was special, but had never asked what was for. In the tower, Colonel Stevens had initiated emergency protocol. Mitchell, are you considering ejecting? Sarah looked out from the cockpit. Below stretched the California desert. Losing this aircraft would mean millions of dollars of research and development going to waste. Worse, it would mean classified technology scattered across the desert. Negative, ma'am. Looking for alternative solution. Sarah tried to recall the manual. In the AFTI program, emergency procedures for experimental aircraft hadn't been fully developed yet. Test pilots were expected to improvise. 15 minutes had passed since engine failure. Fuel was running low. Sarah was burning more fuel to maintain altitude with single engine. Tower, Mitchell, how much fuel remains? Approximately 20 minutes at normal consumption. You need to find a solution within 20 minutes. Sarah began reanalyzing aircraft systems. Standard F-16s had manual backup hydraulic pump, but she didn't know if this backup worked in experimental systems. Tower, I'm going to test manual hydraulic pump. Copy that. Be careful. Sarah flipped the emergency switch in the cockpit. Manual pump activated, but pressure was very low. Not enough to deploy landing gear. Then she heard a familiar voice on the radio. X-47, this is Chief Williams. Can you hear me? Williams, I hear you. Sarah, you can do partial gear deployment with manual pump. Not enough for full deployment, but you can partially deploy main gear. What about nose gear? You'll need to manually unlock nose gear. In the cockpit, behind your seat, there's an emergency gear release handle. Sarah reached back and found the handle. But pulling this handle meant nose gear wouldn't be controllable. Landing would be very risky. Williams, what's the success probability? We don't have test data, but you can do this. Sarah, you have 47 test flights. You're our most experienced test pilot. Colonel Stevens in the tower intervened. Mitchell, ejecting would be safer. Sarah thought deeply. For 6 years, she had worked for this program. This aircraft was the future of next-generation fighter technology. Losing it would mean the program going back years. Tower, I'm going to attempt landing. Mitchell, it's too risky. Ma'am, this risk is in my job description. Sarah initiated emergency landing procedure. First step, partially deploy main gear with manual hydraulic pump. She flipped the switch. Hydraulic pumps started working. Aircraft shook slightly and main landing gear partially deployed. Gear hadn't come down completely, but had come down enough to prevent the aircraft from belly landing. Now, nose gear. Sarah pulled the emergency handle. A metallic sound was heard in the cockpit, and nose gear unlocked. But she couldn't see if gear had deployed, could only see that the green light had gone out. Tower, gear deployment partial. Starting landing approach. Copy X-47. Emergency cruise in standby position. Sarah began approach to runway. Single engine, partial gear, experimental aircraft. Everything could go wrong. Other pilots continued listening to tower frequency. Marcus Thompson. This woman has lost her mind. She should eject. But Major Rodriguez knew Sarah's skill level. If anyone can do this, it's Sarah Mitchell. Sarah entered final approach. Airspeed 140 knots, altitude 500 feet. She could see the runway. Emergency vehicles were waiting at the runway's edge. Tower, I'm on final approach. Copy X-47. Wind 090 at 5 knots. Sarah tried to stabilize the aircraft. Landing with single engine was very sensitive. If power was too low, aircraft would stall. If power was too high, might not be able to stop on runway. Altitude 200 feet. Sarah tried to estimate nose gear status. If gear wasn't fully deployed, gear could collapse during nose landing. 100 feet. Past runway threshold. She could see main gear was partially deployed. Couldn't see nose gear, but green light was still off. 50 feet. Started flare maneuver. Flare with single engine was very critical. If too aggressive, engine power could be insufficient and aircraft could drop. Touchdown. Main gear touched runway. Aircraft stayed on runway, but nose gear hadn't touched down yet. Sarah tried to lower nose gently. Nose gear touched runway and held. Emergency handle had worked and nose gear had deployed. As aircraft rolled out on runway, Sarah applied thrust reverse and used wheel brakes. Stopping distance was longer with single engine, but runway was long enough. Aircraft stopped. Sarah shut down engines and opened canopy. Emergency crew vehicles approached aircraft. Colonel Stevens' voice came from tower. X-47, outstanding job. Aircraft status. As Sarah climbed out of cockpit, aircraft intact, ma'am. Mission successful. On ground, Chief Williams ran to Sarah's side. Sarah, that was incredible. I've never seen a landing like that. Emergency crews began inspecting aircraft. Structural damage was minimal. Engine replacement would be needed, but aircraft was salvageable. Other pilots also came to runway to see landing. Marcus Thompson approached Sarah. Mitchell, what was that aircraft really? Sarah, removing her helmet. Classified. But you, how did you make a landing like that? Single engine, partial gear. Sarah looked at Marcus. Training. Lots of training. Major Rodriguez approached. Mitchell, I know you've been here for 6 years, but none of us knew what you were doing. Sarah, adjusting her flight suit. Sir, some things have to remain classified. But now, still classified now, sir. But in an emergency situation, life safety is priority. Colonel Stevens had come down from tower and approached Sarah. Mitchell, I'm going to report this landing to Pentagon. This performance was exceptional. Thank you, ma'am. But program confidentiality must be maintained. Of course. But you really are a test pilot. Sarah smiled. For the first time in 6 years. Yes, ma'am. For the past 6 years, I've been testing next-generation fighter technology. Marcus Thompson still looked amazed. So you were never a normal pilot? You were always a test pilot. Marcus, Sarah said, warmed in her voice for the first time. I came to Edwards as a test pilot, but because the program was classified, I couldn't tell anyone. I had to act like a normal pilot around you. For 6 years. Chief Williams intervened. Sarah, let's get aircraft a hangar. We need to do engine inspection. Sarah nodded and went to aircraft. Experimental F-16X stood in sunlight, damaged but intact. Classified but now somewhat exposed. Personnel in tower continued discussing this incident. Air traffic controller Harrison. She's been doing silent test flights here for 6 years. None of us knew. Supervisor. That's how classified programs work. Need to know basis. But that landing, I've never seen anything like it. That evening at Officers Club, pilots talked about Sarah. But this time they weren't mocking. This time there was respect. Marcus Thompson. She acted like a ghost for 6 years. Now I understand why. Major Rodriguez. Test pilots are a different breed. They fly with unknown. We fly with proven aircraft. But that landing showed why she's a test pilot. Next day, Sarah returned to normal routine, went to her hangar, inspected her aircraft, but she wasn't completely alone anymore. Other pilots saw her differently. Chief Williams showed engine replacement plan to Sarah. New engine arrives within 2 weeks. We can continue test flights. Sarah said, yesterday's emergency exposed classification. What will happen to program's future? Talk to Pentagon. Program will continue, but security protocols will be updated. You're still lead test pilot. Sarah nodded. Good. This technology is important. Future generation pilots will benefit from this. 2 weeks later, new engine was installed, and Sarah made first post-incident test flight. This time, everything went normally. But now, everyone in Tower knew X-47 was special. Colonel Stevens, watching Sarah's landing approach. Mitchell's skill level is extraordinary. That landing deserves to go in textbooks. Months later, AFTI program was declassified and F-16X became foundation of next-generation fighter development. Sarah's contributions were officially recognized. But for Sarah, most important was what she proved that emergency day. Experience. Training and calm decision-making could overcome any crisis. Now at Edwards Air Force Base, when pilots talk about Sarah, they didn't say ghost woman. They said test pilot Mitchell. And every young pilot wanted to be like her. Because Sarah Mitchell wasn't just an exceptional pilot. She was a warrior who made impossible possible, a silent hero in classified world, who stayed calm in crisis. And most importantly, that day she proved that real skill develops silently, reveals in crisis, and respect must be earned, not demanded.